Can you get my tiny?
No?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Right. Let me move that.
See you well and clear, ready to report. Testing mic, testing mic.
Yeah. Can I do an introduction?
Did you already do the introductions?
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna do the introduction, okay? All right. I'll use the mic.
Sure.
So, I'll just do this. So welcome everybody, although I've said welcome before, but I'm so excited to have Raymond here finally. It's been like an adventure film trying to get him here today. I'm just going to make you aware of a couple things that are coming up in the next couple weeks for the Great Lakes Poetry Festival. Next week, we have our monthly meeting of the Marquette Poets Circle on April 11th. That's at 6:30 p.m. in the Shivers Room upstairs. We workshop from 6:30 to 7:15, and then we have an open mic from 7:15 to 8. And then next week, Friday, we're going to be showing a documentary called Poetry is an Island, Derek Walcott. And he's a Nobel Prize-winning poet from the island of St. Lucia. And if you don't know Derek Walcott, he's really, really wonderful. And then on Monday, April 15th, we have Josh Brindle, who's going to be doing a book release reading right here in the community room from 6 to 7 p.m. So lots of great things coming up. I'm not going to take too much time because we've been waiting long enough for this, right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Raymond. Raymond was raised in Ironwood. That's way up in the Keweenaw Peninsula. And after high school graduation, he went to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., where he earned a BA in English, graduating magna cum laude. He learned American Sign Language and became involved with the deaf community and won numerous scholarships in recognition of his writing, including the Ritz Paris Hemingway Scholarship. And he took various writing courses, including and culminated in winning a place in the Jenny McKean Moore Fiction Workshop at George Washington University. So in 1988, he moved to New York City, and his play, very quickly after that, Snooty, won first place in the New York Deaf Theater's 1990 Samuel Edwards Deaf Playwrights Competition. And his essay, Notes of a Deaf Gay Writer, won acceptance as a cover story on Christopher Street magazine. Soon after, Allison Publications asked him to edit Eyes of Desire, a deaf, gay, and lesbian reader, which, after its appearance in June of 1993, eventually got 2 Lambda Literary Award finalist nominations for Best Lesbian and Gay Anthology and Best Small Press Book. And he has published over 32, I think, collections. His latest is the Uper Poetry Anthology, which is up for sale back there, as well as Far From Atlantis. And he has 2 more books forthcoming this year. One is Oh Yeah, a Bear Poetry Anthology in June of 2024. And then Animals Out There, WILD, a bestiary in English and ASL gloss, which is coming out in September of 2024. I don't know when he sleeps. But anyway, please give a big hand to Raymond Luczak.
Okay. So first of all, apologies for the late flight, and you know your weather, right? I think we all know that. So fair warning, you're hearing the voice of an interpreter, and there may be a lag, and so don't blame it on me, don't blame it on the interpreter. English and ASL are not the same. They're totally different languages, and so there is a lag in the interpretation. It's just natural. So if you feel like there's a lag or things are, time's off, that's what's happening. And so these were written in English. I've then translated them into ASL. And so there's a difference between translation and interpretation as well that's important. So Interpretation is a live act that happens on the fly. Translation is a slow progression to translate things with more finesse and nuance. And so, and here I am, a deaf person on the stage. I didn't want to just spontaneously try to do this. And so the voice you're hearing, the interpreter, if you don't hear the interpreter, please let me know. I want to make sure you fully hear and access this. I'll let the interpreter know to repeat things. And just so you know, just up here in the UP, there's not interpreters really available of this caliber and with this kind of training set. He's in DC, and I think Adam and I have worked together for some 6 years on some of my projects. Has a great ability to work with me in my particular signing style and present my body of work. So, first of all, if there are any questions, if not, I can give you a little bit of background. And I think Marty already told you a little bit about my educational background a bit, and I think that's kind of important to know. And I was born hearing. I was born hearing and then lost my hearing rapidly at 8 or 9 months old with double pneumonia and resulting in high fever. So my family didn't realize that I'd become deaf until about 2.5 years later. And so they're growing up in a large family of somewhat 9 children, or 8 children, so there were 7 of us. And so what do you do with all these other kids running around? And they noticed that I wasn't talking. And so there was a whole room full of kids talking. And then when somebody would come to the door, and the kids would just instantly turn and look and know that somebody was there because they could hear. And I noticed that happening faster. And that took me a while to track what these visual cues were, realized somebody else was at the door, and that's how I knew my name was being called. But people thought I could hear just because I would respond because my name would be called. And that wasn't the case. So anyway, around 2.5 years old, we went to a doctor, for your annual physical. And the doctor was wondering, why isn't Raymond talking? And my parents were just, what? And the doctor said, what? You don't realize he's deaf? You didn't know? Yeah. So at that time, they gave me the hearing aid of that era, which was a very large device worn on the body, with a big battery pack and headphones that came with it. And at the time, they also largely forbade sign language. Back in those days, the belief was held that if you learned to sign, you could never learn to speak, and that the quality of the speech acquired would degrade. And it's really a silly myth, a theory that doesn't hold water. So anyway, some time passes, and then there were really no deaf programs where I grew up in Ironwood. And this is the sign, by the way, that I use for Ironwood. And I say that because this was a mining town, and so this is a play on the sign for mining, replicating that with the letter I to stand for the place name. And so, just some context for that. So, growing up in Ironwood, they didn't have the programs, and then some 2 hours away in Houghton, which, if you know the UP, is where the Michigan University is. There was a deaf program there in Houghton, and some of the deaf kids from the Northwest and UP and all of that would go into this one program that was speech only and forbade sign language. It's a strange thing, really, to think that they instilled in us the idea that signing was a dirty secret, because we were only to speak in the classroom, but on the playground, we all naturally engaged in some kind of a gestural system, a visual language, or a desire to sign was innate in each of us. So then sometime later, some 5 years later, went back to Ironwood and back into their educational system. It was the worst 5 years of my life. Horrible experience, just personally demeaning. And then that pops up in some of my books. And then after 5 years there, I went back to Houghton, and then the program had changed from speech only to some SIMCOM, dual language of signing and speaking. So they were using not real American Sign Language. They were using the signs from it, the components, but trying to map it onto a direct map of English and the way English worked with its word endings and all of those particularities in an artistic way. And so then, at the age of 14, I asked my speech therapist I could sign it. They thought, they were just like gasped and like, oh. And I was pretty stubborn at 14, as 14-year-olds can be. And I found one teacher who knew some sign. At the time, and this was called SEE, Signed Exact English. And so I had one-on-one tutoring with them, and they brought this large book that at the time was all mimeographed, photocopied. And so, and I had not really encountered this. I didn't know that you could photocopy a whole book, and I'm not sure it was entirely allowed, but they did. And so this was a newer technology to photocopy a book. And so the teacher brought this, and so we had a class session, and we would try to cover about 30 signs in an afternoon in the backyard there. And so then at the end of that time, like I just gone through the whole book in no time, and the teacher was left stumbling, no idea what to do. But I learned these and memorized them with a passion instantly, as though I knew them already almost. And so there was an innate desire, a demand to learn sign language. And so a couple of years later, after 5 years in that out of school system, I learned that the deaf oral program there had become a SIMCOM, simultaneous communication it's called, which is a system of trying to sign and talk at the same time. And so then after that, I ended up going to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., where I learned American Sign Language. And so that background story situates the context of different deaf people and their varying educational backgrounds, shapes how we view the world. It shapes how we see how deaf people are perceived by others, how we use language, each of these languages. And so, as somebody who's grown up from the school for the deaf will be expected to sign in a certain way, and they would have, and there's different kinds of signing. Some are signing in a very sort of elite fashion with adept American Sign Language, some using English in different ways. And so there's ways of distinguishing yourself in your community by the way you're signing. And so sometimes people say your signing is beautiful, but deaf people who grow up with that sort of elitist native sign experience, say that I sign quite clear, but there are other signers who can sign a paragraph in almost a sign. They sign so adeptly and pack nuance into it, and it is so difficult for interpreters to try to capture that nuance and translate it. There's so much ability, and some people can sign and it's just like butter, and so it takes a very long time for me to work through the translations here, and there's so many layers to meaning. And so I think, okay, so it's sort of a sweet revenge, because so many deaf people have been forced to learn to speak, which is a difficult task. And if you've not heard your own voice and heard others' voices, how do you know how to modulate that? So many deaf people speak with a very heavy sort of nasal voice, and it's partially because we've never heard ourselves speak from the diaphragm. That way you don't have that sort of auditory feedback. So okay, and so that's probably enough of that background, and I think we'll get the show going on. And it's I'm not going to go into exposition on the background of every single poem. I think I might put you to sleep. Let's make sure everybody's awake now. Everybody awake? Okay. Hey, deaf people can dance. Okay. So, just one moment. So, I grew up with this hearing family, not a lot of communication with them, and I started writing poetry way back then. And so, this first book of poetry is called The Way Up. The Way to the Acorns. So this one is about nature, and just across the street from my mother's house was a little woodland area. And again, I said this was a mining town, and this was a mine that had been abandoned, and it was probably a mine back in the day, but it was just left to be, and it caved in for a very long time. And when I was a kid, we used to play and romp and adventure there. And so this was my child's eye view of that at that time. And now this book, Chlorophyll, is the same area, same explorations, but as an adult. The prior one was talking about the view that I had of it as a child, and this is upon return as an adult, that experience of nature, especially at the UP. And so those are four. Now imagine 4 seasons personified was the goal there. And so we'll start off with the orange-haired girl. Everyone keeps saying how beautiful autumn looks, even though she's still struggling to smile in her bed. After one false alarm of death after another, the doctors keep changing her prognosis. They marvel at the colors of her hair changing. No one says anything about the red-orange strands of her hair falling to the floor in her hospital room. Their feet rustle rattlesnakes among the crispy leaves as they pretend she is still fire and glory. Having your days numbered is punishment enough. Soon, there is no recourse but to pull the plug. The ground, stiff with rage, the splinters, shovels, trees grieve and shrink into stick figures. Bitterness becomes an art form. Tears hurt so much that even they seep into the bone. The next poem I'll read is In the Nightclub. Winter always waits by the mirrored wall, smoking one cigarette after another. Everyone is afraid to look into his strobed light eyes, fluttering them into shells of themselves by the time he's done French kissing them. But he usually dances alone. It is then the music stops and everyone stares when he continues to move to the silence that only he hears. He shows no embarrassment when he catches their gaze. They come here every night for his magic. You could say he's developed quite a reputation. Mostly what a terrible husband he would make. All that is quickly forgotten when they catch a single tear melting down his porcelain cheek. And next I'll read Winter's Ex-Girlfriend. Spring is a girl who's cried all night, only to find that morning easily forgives the coldness of him having left her stranded among the thicket of evergreens, where rabbits dart and deer forage. With a kiss of sun each day, she will gather up all her strength, blessing the stiff soil, with the thawing of frozen tears seeping as she sleeps, and make true her dream of the day when her fingers are no longer numb. The one who left her will become a puddle when she rises to her full height and looks ahead. Summer, her true love, will soon fall for her, and she will one day die in his giddy arms. But shh, don't tell her she's got a poor heart. The mop-haired boy. Summer is a mop-haired, toothy grinned boy who's never had to work a day in his life. Lanky yet never gawky, he ambles by all the girls with petals in their hair, oozing gasps of nectar in his wake. Full of weed-induced giggles, he lazes about and says, "Man, what's happening?" a lot. Nights of fireflies puncture the haze of his vision. He inhales poppy scents of romance. But it's not enough. So, heroin it is. He doesn't understand why nobody wants him now. He's forgotten how one can stink after not bathing so long. Forced to enter a methadone clinic, he cuts his hair, seeing his own pock-marked face in the mirror for the first time. It is a terrible autumn. Okay, 1 second. So, now the next one is one of the poems from one of my past books, Once Upon a Twin. So, oddly enough, my mother told me a couple of conflicting stories here and that I didn't make connections with until sometime later. My mother told me that she had a miscarriage in February, and another time she told me a different story that waffled around, and eventually when I was 16, well, another story was told me that she was sitting on the toilet and a fetus popped up. And I was like, what a strange story, okay? And so I started wondering for a very long time, what was this? Was this like a potential twin? Because back then, sometimes, one twin might have been lost and the other continued, and they didn't really have sonograms and ultrasounds and to see in there accurately enough to track all that sometimes. So I just started wondering, what if that story she told was a twin that I'd had that could have survived and been my twin growing up in this hearing family? And I would have had them. And would they have been, deaf? Would they have been straight? Would they have been what? And so I started thinking about this context of this potential twin that I could have had in that family. And so again, there's complex feelings having a hearing family, because you have to imagine what we call dinner table syndrome, where everyone else is telling a story, someone's telling a story at the dinner table, and and the last few years there's a lot of discussion about this, but a correction of the interpretation. And so very often these stories would be told, and the same phrase would always be said when I inquired about it. And what did they say? I'll tell you later. So in the last few years, the term dinner table syndrome has come about to describe this. But it describes this experience of being in a whole family of hearing people, and it can be a painful experience. Because your family, you should know better, right? You want to make everything accessible to your kid, wouldn't you? And so everybody is laughing and joking, and I'm spending this time trying to access what was happening, and I'm asking somebody what happened, and again you get this message, I'll tell you later. And so when you go to say, what was it that they said? Oh, I've forgotten. And it was nothing. And so you ask the same question. So this builds up with this sense of rage in these deaf members of hearing families. And so we learn our place in these families. Like the family dog, right? The pet that's sweet to talk to sometimes and then shunt away when you're ready for adult conversation with others. And so it's a very traumatizing experience. And so this book really is expository and telling that kind of story about myself. And so, and a family of 8, 9 people, and so okay, and so, thank you. correcting the interpretation. And so this is a perfect example of what happens. And sometimes you know that sometimes with the hearing family, you don't understand. Everything has to stop for a minute to clarify what's happening. And so I'm telling you, if you look at how hearing families with deaf kids are just engaging in conversation and then not looking at the person there, the same thing is happening sometimes in a deaf environment where somebody's not understanding, but it's very natural for us in a deaf environment to pause, include, clarify. And so I think if you grow up hearing, then you just don't get, literally, you just don't get what that experience is like. So, a little background here. In the 70s, I didn't have hearing aids. And I wore, at that time, what's called a body aid. It was a large device you wore, and it kind of looked like a bra. The other kids would call me, wearing a bra because I had to wear this, body aid, hearing aid that was strapped over my shoulders. So, that's important context for this next poem. Entitled, Deaf Rich Boy, 79. Deaf Rich Boy, 79. I would one day be the son of that rich man with a monocle found in the game of Monopoly. I'd own the entire town beyond Penida. I wouldn't think twice about buying a pair of expensive designer jeans at the Down Under shop at Starnet Field. All the kids in my class would ask meekly to see my latest handheld electronic game, the kind that you couldn't find anywhere, the kind that the kids would know everything about, the kind they grow antenna just to ferret them out. They turn into insects with shiny shell backs, gleaming with bands of gold strapped across as they murmured and compared between themselves, their dull scores blinking tiny sticks of red light. I'd wear the latest Nike sneakers from JCPenney's, the kinds none of those kids could afford. They'd stare and gawk at me, of all people, when they thought me poor, what with 8 siblings and a dog packed into a house of only 4 bedrooms. My family weren't rich. Everybody knew that. But on the first day of school, I'd say nothing as I hung my denim trucker jacket on my hook. In the hallway, they'd see the name Furstenberg stitched on the back pocket of my new jeans. I'd be wearing a blondie t-shirt to show off the fact that I went to Minneapolis to see the sultry Debbie Harry singing Heart of Glass. For once, the hearing aid cords winding up to my ears would look cool, as if I were always listening to something cool that they'd never hear. Always straining to hear the next hot band. I'd hear them way before they appeared on American bandstands on Saturday afternoon. They'd wish to be deaf like me, always listening to the future. These kids in class would whisper about me, never mocking me, but always with awe. Okay. So, the next book is Far From Atlantis. Yeah, sorry, let me get that out. Far From Atlantis. And so, I've created a sign for Atlantis, and there's a sign that's used for something that's drowning, something that's drowned and been submerged. And so, I use that sign. And so, the story behind that is, of course, the sign for Atlantis was the city fell into the ocean, so that's why I signed it this way. And so this book is a little different from Once Upon a Twin, because about a year and a half before I became a teenager, I was struck with the hormones of every teenager. And so this critical period, I became obsessed with UFOs and Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. Obsessed. There was a year and a half where it was everything. And there was the 60 show, the $6 Million Man, the Wonder Woman, and all of those shows, right? And so there's that context. Okay, and then just quickly, I don't know if you've heard of this fellow Uri Geller. Any of you heard of Uri Geller? Some of you seem to have. Okay, so back in the 70s, he was the hot thing on late night television because he was from Israel and he was a magician of some sort, and he could look at a spoon and cause it to bend upon sight. That was his talent. Okay? And so if you're wondering who Uri Geller is in this poem, that's who it is. And if you look long enough, okay, there we go. A prayer to Uri Geller. Oh, can you grant me the telekinesis to bend the spines of these boys, always taunting, so they buckle from such maleficent pain, their bodies mere spoons. On late night television, your hands become a vision. Oh, can you lend me your gift of telepathy so I won't have to strain hard to read those lips, my brothers and sisters gibbering away around the kitchen. You're accused of fraud, yet people still applaud. Oh, can you divine me like the God you are, communicating with extraterrestrials 53,000 light years away, so I can rise up on high. You're backtracking, sleeping, confused. Who'd believe me? Oh, can anyone else save me from all this gobbledygook of lips moving, faces laughing, as if I'm no longer a presence, misunderstanding. So the next poem is entitled The $6 Million Deaf Boy. After being abducted by aliens and left incoherent in the woods across the street, the government would quietly whisk me away into a secret hospital where machine parts would be grafted little by little onto my non-functioning body parts. Now bionic, I would hear the quietest of sounds, gone ultrasonic. I would jot down hushed conversations and stave off the threat of war from other nations. I would fend off would-be assassins plotting to kill President Carter and leave them rotting. I would run tirelessly from Ironwood to Houghton, never soaking any of my shirts made of cotton. Over a mere 120 miles away, under an hour, zipping down the 2-lane highway, just to see my best friend Todd and say hello and wear a headlight, sprinting like a whizzing glow, as my bionic eyes would infrared deep into the trees where Bigfoot would dare venture out of mystery, to forage for food only at night so he'd never get shot. I would run beside Steve Austin and never feel fraught with danger, as he was my new father. Protecting me wouldn't be a bother. But evil men always kidnapped me, not knowing of my abilities. not knowing of my abilities, my leaps would be mind-blowing to all but me. Landing on the street 100 feet below would be easy. My kidnappers would be abysmally slow, trying to hurry down the escape stairs where I leap up again with the air. Atop another building, I'd survey the skyline and calculate just where I could find my new dad dashing through the streets, zeroing in on the location of my heartbeat. He'd find my kidnappers, cursing again to kill me. Then I'd hear a click, and then my dad would kick open the iron door with such force that they were floored. But I wouldn't be. Come on, he'd say, let's go together. We'd run far away to a home where hearing perfectly wasn't a requirement to be part of a family. The next poem is entitled A Bright Green. After Lou Ferrigno playing The Incredible Hulk from 1977 to 1982, with not a single sound, shadows fall in the lab. Would he be caught? Would he be stabbed? Would his secret be found? He's perfected his smile, trying so hard to hide the loneliness inside, but sometimes his guile, too long suppressed, can tear apart his white lab coat. His rage needs time to gloat and toss anyone near. How I'd long to turn green each time those boys turned mean. The next poem is entitled The Deaf Boy from Atlantis. And this is after Patrick Duffy playing The Man from Atlantis, 1977 to 78. I was all legs and bones when you appeared, covered with kelp on TV. A storm had appeared, flinging you from the bottom of the sea onto the shore. A father and son appeared and called for help. You found it difficult to breathe there in the hospital, yet Dr. Elizabeth Merrill appeared to figure out what needed to be done. You were brought back to the ocean, where you finally appeared, revived, with your webbed feet and hands. Then the phrase, "Last citizen of Atlantis," appeared on the computer screen. You glanced at the people and their strange customs. Confused, you appeared to everyone, but you kept silent, not yet speaking. You had to get out when an open window appeared in the government building where you were kept. You didn't know you had to pause when cars appeared, driving down the street, and you ended up stuck in a phone booth, frantic that you couldn't open its door. A young boy appeared, pushing open to let you out. You wandered lost, dazed at this foreign world opening up. Dr. Merrill appeared just in time to find you full of enigmatic wonder. You eventually learned to speak English and appeared to gradually learn the odd gesture of shaking hands with each new acquaintance. Yet you still appeared to ache for water. There you bobbed forward, your hands at your sides. Your bright green irises appeared to glow in the water. The deeper you swam past scuba divers, the more alive you appeared, not worrying at all whether you'd run out of oxygen. Your lungs were closed, and a chest that appeared perfectly sculpted with its supple pectorals. You were nothing like me as I appeared, barely a skeleton. But I knew we could be friends because of how strange the hearing world appeared to the two of us. Perhaps I'd forgotten how to swim, and I was destined to remember when you appeared. So, that book has two sections. There's part of it that we just read from, and then there's the middle section that looks at like what life would have looked like in Atlantis. And this, some of the imaginings of my childhood. So I've selected one of those poems, and this character's name is Hermes, who was the famous sort of, two-faced god. And also not the well-known fashion brand Hermes. Instead, the god Hermes. Okay. Hermes. On the days when I'm bored, I swoop down in disguise, brandishing my fine sword, and strut around with lies of having conquered Troy and having kissed Helen. It's a well-practiced ploy to drink wine, eat melon, and scope out who else I can fleece out of pride and coins, lest I get quickly banned. Until then, I ply loins like strings on a lyre. Nothing like teasing fire. Okay. Now, the next one is called The Other Wonder Woman. Of course, honoring Linda Carter, playing the eponymous character, Wonder Woman, from 1975 to 1979. If only I could travel back in time to stand boldly, smack center of the parking lot in front of them boys playing Nerf football. I'd take off my ear molds and body hearing aids, much like how Princess Diana Prince always took off her glasses and shook her luxuriously long hair free just before spinning, and stretch out my arms to spin, of course, never losing my sense of balance. Like I tried to spin in the same spot just like her in the living room late at night after I'd seen the latest episode, and I scowled the glow of my nuclear rage radiating while the beige cords between my hearing aids and ear molds turned laser fire into the lasso of truth. Suddenly a swirl with slickness of neon, hissing high above me, the lasso would write, "Sear, shame on you," on the undersides of their eyelids. I would crack it against the pavement, splintering their foamy Nerf football into shrapnel, bits of hearing aids stabbing forever into their girdled souls. Okay, now, the last poem is entitled Voice from the Sea. My voice is a mystery of mangled consonants. They are slimy stones breaking the river of vowels. They turn into hard pimples that never go away. Go ahead, stone me. One day this polluted ocean of sickly compliments will be cleansed. Only then can I swim past the breakwater of hearing aids, lined with the larynx algae. Spare me the chemical of lie. Dolphins will accompany me to the end of my days, bathing me in languages I will never know. I will cast my first stone. I await that first splash of water. Okay, thank you so much. I see some of you giving the ASL sign for applause. Thank you. And so I'll open up for a bit of Q&A, and I'm not sure how well Adam will hear, so I think you'll need to use that microphone that's up there. Or Marty, you can moderate that if needed.
So we're just going to switch it over so that the mic is going directly into the computer so that Adam can hear. And so anybody that wants to come up and ask a question, you can come up and just use the mic. So.
Okay, sure. And so, yeah, now I'm not a millionaire, that's not the question, so go ahead, ask your question. And yes, I can dance, and yes, deaf people can drive, and yeah, can enjoy music, sure. Go for it.
I'm charmed and touched by how impacted you were by 1970s television, particularly those science fiction ones like The Bionic Man and The Bionic Woman and Wonder Woman and The Incredible Hulk and all of those. You had to have enjoyed those or taken them in almost like a silent movie. Am I correct in that?
You mean? Exactly. So if you imagine that you have the dialogue here. Imagine that this dialogue comes up. Like there's this story that this deaf woman I know tells me, who was many years older than me, and she was watching The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, right? So she's watching, and of course there were no captions at that time. And so it was Technicolor, it was these fabulous costumes that we all know from Wizard of Oz. And then finally, when she saw it with captions, she did not like it. She didn't like it. She was disappointed because the story that she made in her head was so different. So when I was young, I was searching for, well, and again, I was very picked on at the time, and so, kids are bullied often. Want to imagine some way to save ourselves suddenly. Okay, another one? Any other questions? Oh, you have the question in sign? Okay, I'll repeat it so that the interpreter can interpret it. So you can ask me, you sign it, great, and so I'll repeat it so that the interpreter can then interpret it into English so the rest of the audience can hear it. Okay, go ahead and ask the question. Okay, basically asking my favorite story of a mishandled sign or a way somebody has erroneously signed something. Okay. So before I tell you that story, I have to give you a brief sort of synopsis here of something. So, like sometimes on TV, you'll have hearing people who are, asking the interpreter, hey, what's the sign for that? What's the sign for that? And they're looking for dirty signs because there's just this history of, ASL was almost went extinct. Almost went extinct. There was such a hard line against them. So really, I think it's rude and disrespectful to ASL to simply have that sort of pure interest. Ooh, tell me how to cuss in sign language. And I think, just as an example, if you watch, you can tell if a movie was directed by a hearing or deaf a director when there's a deaf character in a movie. It's really obvious. If the director was hearing and there's a deaf character, the facial expressions will be muted and it'll look almost monotone to deaf signers because hearing people will say, oh my gosh, your expressions are all over the map, you need to tone it down. But those facial expressions are what make our intonation, our inflections. And so hearing people that sometimes see deaf people as two, they expect to see the noble deaf signer with this resolute face and it's very, a muddle and, signing just ever so. You know what I mean? But deaf performers and deaf directors they're gonna bring the expressions on. There's gonna be that nuance there. So, okay, now I'll tell you a story involving a dirty sign, but I'm not gonna show a dirty sign. Okay? Just not doing it. You'll probably figure out what the word was. And so there are families here, I'm not gonna tell it all, but hearing people are always like, oh my gosh, what's that dirty sign? Or, and So in my opinion, I don't think that's great. So in the summer of '84, I went into university, and at that time, I'd been in high school and I used signed exact English, this way of signing that's trying to mimic the way we speak English. And so they had this program in SP, the new signers program for people coming to the university that didn't know sign language yet. And so there was this girl named Rhoda who came from Texas. And there were a number of classes to help us, and we were sorting into class, those who knew no sign language at all, those who were intermediate, and those who just needed some polishing of the new signers. And so somebody had taught her the dirty sign for the F word. And so somebody came and asked the teacher, like, what this sign meant for the F word, and the teacher spelled it out, F-U-C-K, right? And just spelled it out very blank-faced, right? And the whole class erupted into laughter, everybody was embarrassed, and then they made up, her sign name was given to her with the letter R. And so in a little background, sign names are attributed to somebody from deaf communities in a natural way, and you don't make them up there yourself. And so she went, and then now looking back, I think, oh my gosh, how horrible this was that we did this. And that was her name sign forever, and it was associated with this dirty sign. And I don't think we meant to hurt her, but wow, her name sign became associated with that dirty joke for pretty much forever. And she ended up leaving Gallaudet, and I have to wonder if that name sign resulted in harassment. Yeah. So at the time, it was a funny little play on sign, and yet. Okay. So next question, anyone? Yeah, if you don't have questions, I don't have answers, so come on up.
Hi, I have, sorry, too long. I have a question about the rhyme in your poem. The use of the end rhyme and the use of rhyming in general, kind of what role it plays for you as I think of rhyme as a voice thing. And then also kind of your perspective on, as a poet, how important it is as we write things sometimes to speak them aloud as part of the editing process. Like I don't know exactly what the poem feels like until I say it to myself, and sort of what your process is as a poet. And whether speaking it aloud in some way or signing it aloud, signing it is part of your process. I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
Okay, did everybody get that question? Okay, so, let me see, this person signing in the audience, are you deaf or hearing? I want to make sure you got access to the question. So I just want to make sure that they have that. And so, I'm sure this is a new experience for a lot of you in the hearing audience, not to have this sort of check on communication back and forth. There was a long question. Let me try to answer it as best I can. So first of all, when I write poetry, and I remember who first told me I should write poetry, it was my speech therapist ages ago, and it was a different kind of speech therapist, really. And so they suggested writing poetry in the form of a limerick. In a limerick, and there's a typical structure of 5-line in rhyme, A, B, B, or A, B, A, B, and then you have the limited structure with a funny, humorous last line with a punch, right? We all know the structure, and so I started writing those, and at their suggestion, and then just took off. And at first, of course, I was learning from speech therapists. I was learning to try to speak for and listen to myself, and my speech therapist said that I was always very clear with my consonants, like ST, and sometimes I wasn't always perfectly clear and sharp. I couldn't do those because I couldn't hear myself to get those really sharp. And and a lot of the high frequencies are lost in my particular hearing levels. And so I wrote a number of limericks and then kind of forgot about it for some time. But in my work as a poet, I kind of joke and say, Madonna, the singer, she always said, leaves empty space for a new look. She says never stagnate, all of that, and she said she's all about persona, right? She has a different persona in every one of her albums, and a different look, and different, she's got the money for it too, and makes some money for it. So my approach now is typically, and again, most poets will write one poem at a time, and that's just not how I work. I usually will, just as an example, I wrote these 4 months apart. Right. I wrote these 4 months apart, so they're very different. But the first one, Far From Atlantis, I was staying with a friend in St. Louis, Missouri. And so I was writing a book, and I said, I know I'm coming here, I'm gonna stay for a while, I'm gonna write a book. I don't know what about, I'm just gonna do it. And I was on the bus there. It was a long bus ride because I'm poor, I can't afford to fly everywhere, and the U.S. is big, so it takes a long time. So I had a lot of time to think about whatever, and I didn't know what I was gonna do. And then when I got there, so okay, first thing in the morning, got up, and the first book I did in traditional forms of books I'd seen for many years, and I thought, okay, you know what? There are different forms, different techniques, but what about let's grab onto Atlantis and work with that. And it was hard for me to move forward with it because these different writing forms were tough to work with. And so that book, my prior book, Once Upon a Twin, you'll notice that there's no particular form, no overarching, there's no capitalization, there's no punctuation in it. It's the polar opposite, right? And so it says, no, don't bind me with form, and it shuns it. And so that book, it makes sense because I'm talking about the twin whose language is not complete because they're not completely present. And so there's a sense of the way that that's written that reflects that. So when I write a book, I kind of think about what the overarching subject is and then how I want to approach it. I think you have to work with some kind of limitations. Once Upon a Twin, I said, you know what? I'm not going to use these particular forms. No capital letters. No, I'm not going to use the same punctuation in the same way because my twin was lost and isn't fully present, and so I want some of that to be reflected. Now, in the book I just wrote and just finished, one of my best friends died very suddenly just 2 years ago. And I used a different format for this. Each page is 5 lines. Now, each line is a poem of its own. And this was terribly difficult to write a single line that was in and of itself a poem that could stand on its own. And then there are 5 lines of these that come up to the moment that he died. And you know how they say that you see your whole life flash before your eyes in a moment of death? That's encapsulated in these quick snapshots, dreamscapes of life. Each one of these lines has to represent a poem on its own legs. And so I've written my books with different kinds of forms like that. And once I finish a book and finish that form, then I'll kind of go away from it for a while and, finish my draft, come back about a month later and see if things still make sense there. Hope is the idea. So if you get a book published, then you send these manuscripts off and send them to journals and such. You have to get enough credit to be able to show, somebody and get published. That's kind of how the business works. And so sometimes you have to develop these drafts that have these pitches basically, and then you send them out, and then the idea is to get them out there and then send several off at the same time. And that's how I got so many books published within a short span of time, is because I'm looking over at several different journals, sending material off, and the clock's ticking. And so a lot of times, it takes 5 years to do a book, but I just don't have that long, and so I'm sending this off to several people and making sure that I'm doing the business right. And so when I do this 5-line poem, for example, I can send that to several different people as a sort of pitch, and a whole book of that sort of structure, and just hope they like it. But so I'm not sure if I covered everything in your question, but if I haven't, please do tell me. And any other questions? Dun, 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 dun. Am I just so deaf that I can't hear any questions you have over there? In area 1? What was that? Okay. Wait, do you want to come up here and share an experience? So if you come up here, then the interpreter can see you and can interpret for you. No? Okay, that's fine, I'll respect that. So I was talking about the experience of wearing body aids and the hearing aids, and yeah, I want you to be able to see you. Yeah, hugging is big in deaf culture, whoever it is. So, he was talking about his experience way back when with the big body aids and the large headphone sets. And I remember in 1987, I was in elementary school, they had these big clunky devices that I was wearing. I have such a vivid memory of just yanking those headphones out, twirling them around, knocking them around, and the teacher upset about it. And that memory is so distinct for this period. And then after that, we had the smaller kind of hearing aids that were a little more mobile. But yeah, I remember and related to that bit of your poem right there. Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I want to add to that this is true for many deaf kids these days now have cochlear implants. You'll see that very often. And something you need to understand about the cochlear implants is that it can help some deaf people hear. And one of the big drawbacks they come with some drawbacks though. And some 20, 25 years ago, there was a film made. A correction of the interpretation. I was a cameraman, videographer for a project. And the director was making a documentary about a deaf woman. This is about deaf people in deaf culture getting hearing aids. Getting cochlear implants some 25 years ago. And this deaf person had not heard anything, not really used hearing aids. And so this was looking at this person's journey. So we sat down and did film the interview with the audiologist, and they're over there talking away and filming that. So then they packed away, I packed away the equipment, and then I asked the audiologist off the record. I said, well, what about music? What's music going to be like? Well, a lot of deaf people hate it. people with cochlear implants often hate the experience of listening to music. And it's interesting to see why. When you look at the sound, the range of frequencies, and there's from like 8,000 channels of frequencies generally, and cochlear implants back then could channel maybe 36 channels out of a natural 8,000. Imagine that whole range of sound being reduced and compressed to that. And so then also this woman, when her cochlear implant was first turned on, you see her, and she keeps saying, like, why do I keep hearing these beeps and these weird sounds again and again and again? And so when people have cochlear implants, that the sound their brain has to be retrained to hear these beeps as representing the sounds around them. And so it's not a true reflection of how natural speech sounds or how the sound naturally hears. And so if you were used to hearing in the old way before the implant, then the cochlear implants can feel clunky and cumbersome in the way they convey sound. Now, I'm not anti-cochlear implants. Lots of deaf people have them. They have the right to get them. Good for them, no problem. My problem in terms of me getting them ever is, in order to get the cochlear implant, they have to completely change the connections in your ear. It severs the normal connections into the cochlea. So they bring the device into the cochlea where the sound and nerve endings would generally be transmitted, and then that's it. It wipes out all the natural, normal ability to hear in that ear. So that can't be restored. You can only hear through the cochlear implant after that. And so they're working now on doing regenerating the dead nerve cells, so they can leave the good ones alone and just take the ones that are misfired and misgrowing, and do that. Now, I don't really care about learning to talk. I don't care so much about that, but I would love to hear music. Yeah, talking, who cares? Okay? Okay, so... Okay, go ahead. If you sign it, I'll copy what you said and mirror it for the interpreter. Missed the question. What's it? Oh, what's one thing I would say to somebody who is afraid to learn sign language? Well, Woody Allen had a great phrase back in the 70s, before he got weird. He had this funny comic line where he said, the best thing about being bisexual is it doubles your chances for a date on a given Saturday night. The same thing is true of signing. The worst thing that can happen is you increase your pool of potential friends. You get more deaf people in the community. And so you just got to step outside the box of English, And when I write down, so I know some American Sign Language, I know some British Sign Language, and some Danish Sign Language, and some French Sign Language. I know a few of those sign languages, but having that has really helped me as a writer because I'm not stuck in the confines of English the way it has always been. And so, I have another book coming in the fall to be published entitled, and so ASL has something called ASL Gloss. Animals out there, WILD. That's a representation of ASL Gloss. It's not a translation. And so ASL has no written form. And so there are a lot of scholars who have tried to argue about creating one, but there's no consistent written form of ASL at all used in the community. So that means, and so we use ASL Gloss as a way of representing ASL. You ascribe an English word to a sign, and you put it in the order in which it would be signed, not the traditional English sentence structure that would be typical in English, because I can't read the English poem as I originally wrote it and then sign it in ASL, because these are different languages. I have to restructure them in ASL gloss when I perform them. And so I'm going to sign the same sentence in English. Yesterday I saw a sunrise. Okay. Yesterday I saw the sunrise. Okay, that's English. And I'm signing in ASL, and now I'm going to sign it in ASL. Okay, so in ASL gloss, that is sunrise. First you put that, and then yesterday, or I saw yesterday. And so you see the difference in that sentence structure is because ASL's sentence structure organizes time first in the sentence. And so the setting of the time comes first, sunrise. I saw yesterday, when it happened. And so it's a very different structure. So when I sign the forms, inside it makes perfect sense to structure it that way. And so that's why I work with ASL gloss. So animals out there wild. That just means, they're like, 50 different kinds of animals that live in the UP, and there's a list of them. And I do this in ASL gloss. And you can see my book on Uper poetry. You can look over there and see some examples of that back there. So that's kind of a new way that I'm working with, playing with language, both ASL, gloss, and English, and saying what can a poem look like when it's represented this way. So, yeah. Okay, any more questions? Okay.
So my question has to do with this incredible artistic output that you have. I think some of us out here listening to how many books you write in X period of time, and me especially as somebody who's had head trauma, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to live up to that kind of output, but I'd be really curious to see if you have any specific strategies for artists, writers, creatives to maximize their productivity. Thank you.
Okay, and I was waiting for you to sit back down, because that's the norm in deaf culture. Somebody's just asked me a question, I'm going to wait until they reestablish eye contact. I wouldn't just go ahead and answer while you're walking back. That might be the norm in hearing culture, but it's more respectful in deaf culture to wait until I have your eye gazing in. Okay, so in terms of productivity, I'm not producing all the time. There's one book of poetry, for example, that took me a month to just pretty much vomit out onto the page. And then, I worked with editing, did cuts, rearranged, redrafted it, all of that, blah, 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 right? And then, until I had a piece of work I could just leave, sit for a while, come back and say, wow, this is great. And this is crap. And oh my God, is that plotting or whatever. And so, and then I'll find one that I thought was just nothing when I wrote it and go, oh my God, how did I write that? But again, the important thing is don't worry about maximizing efficiencies, just worry about writing quality. You're overwrite. This book is 18 pages, but I probably wrote 150. And then there was a lot that was like, no, that's garbage. That goes, that keeps. And so sometimes I think, oh my God, why did I think this was a good poem? At the time, maybe I thought it was crap, and then I come back to it later. So I would say, don't worry about your production, worry about, the story you want to tell. And whatever kind of artist you are, whatever kind of medium, look at what you can say, how you're going to say it, and how does this help me see things in a new way? How does this help me shift perception? I'm a very curious person, so 1 second. this fall, my book, Animals Out There Wild, is coming out, and I'm very curious about the reaction of deaf communities to the publication of this in ASL Gloss. Many people object to it because it seems to the hearing reader to convey that ASL is a broken English or a baby language or something like that. And what I'm trying to show is how different this looks on the page than it does when it's presented in 3 dimensions with a real person with real expressions. And so it looks completely different on the page. And so that's why I am represented this way, not because it's trendy. It's because when I perform like I am today, I have a sort of teleprompter here, and I have to do it in ASL Gloss because I need to perform it in a way that mirrors the ASL and ASL structure. So this is the system I use. I can't memorize line by line the English poem and its translation in ASL. I'm not an actor. That's not my skill. But what I can do is do the work, do the translation, have it on teleprompter so that I can sign it, and then my interpreter has both the English and ASL glosses to reference. And so they can, and the way I typically go about the translation process, I have my own system. Other deaf people have their ways of going about translation, and I think that's worth exploring. But for me, it's all about it's language. What can we do with it? Play with it. Okay, is it what time to wrap? Is there more? Thank you, Marty, for your patience with me. It's been a very long day. Thank you for coming. And did you already explain all of that and about what happened with flights yesterday and so forth? You did? Okay. It's like a bad hurricane disaster movie, with the slow-moving front and all of that. Thank you all so much for your patience with me. Thank you, and thank Adam, thank Josiah for your tech help. I know we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you very much. My books are at the back, and just thank you so much. Anything else from you?
Yeah, I just want to say that Raymond is going to be staying at the Landmark, and if you wanted to speak with him more, he's going to be going up to the Crow's Nest. So if you wanted to spend some more time and get to know Raymond more, you can, once he checks in and gets in his room, then you can go up to the Crow's Nest, and I believe that he's going to be there. So, yeah. So let's give Raymond some more applause. So.
Thank you all.
And thank you, Adam. And the books are back there if you are interested in purchasing some. So.